She was wearing my mother's brooch, the one I gave Lisa just to keep safe. I don't think I realized it right away. The strangeness of the moment, the shock in seeing my own mother's brooch, shiny and bright, nestled in the collar of a woman I had never met before. It was as if the world tilted slightly on its axis. There it was, clear as day, glinting under the fluorescent lights of the pawnshop window. The brooch, beautiful, timeless, was my mother's legacy, and yet it wasn't mine anymore, wasn't even in my hands, nor my mother's. The person it belonged to was long gone. It was now a stranger's accessory, a piece of me discarded for a quick sale, a forgotten heirloom swallowed up by the ruthless machinery of time and loss. I'd thought it was safe with Lisa. I'd trusted her. I had given her the brooch years ago, asking her to look after it, knowing it was something precious, more than its worth in gold and diamonds. It was my mother's, a gift she had given me before she passed, wrapped up in memories. And when my son Adam and Lisa insisted that I move in with them, just for a while, I didn't hesitate. They needed the help. Adam needed the space. And my presence, once such a steady comfort in his life, had become an unwelcome burden. I never imagined that when I handed over my jewelry box, I would be handing over more than just my possessions. I was giving away my place in their world. There had always been something in Adam's voice when he spoke to me, especially as I got older, that carried with it an unspoken message of diminishing worth. I could hear it in the way he'd ask if I needed anything, always with that forced cheerfulness, the kind that didn't quite match the eyes. His words were kind enough, but the distance in his voice said it all. "You're becoming a problem, Mum." I'd been a burden for years, even before Lisa came into the picture, even before I started needing help to get around or to remember things. But the truth was, I wasn't meant to be a burden at all. I was supposed to be the one who was needed, the one who made sense of the clutter of family lives, the one who still had something to give. But now, I had become just an object to be stashed away in the closet, ignored, made invisible. My worth measured in how little space I took up, and the brooch, my mother's brooch, had become a symbol of how little I was allowed to keep for myself, how much I was slowly being erased. It wasn't the first time something had slipped from my hands, and it wouldn't be the last. Lisa always had her own plans, her own ideas about what was best for the family. She never asked me about my preferences, never bothered to let me have a say in anything. "We'll take care of it," she'd say, always with that smile, always so polite. It wasn't affection I saw in that smile, though. It was control. "Just stay out of the way, Martha. We'll take care of you. Just let us." And I let them. I let them decide where I sat, when I spoke, how I moved about their house. It was their house, after all. Their lives, their rules. I had no say. I just went along, trying to fit in, trying to blend in, as quietly as I could. The days passed in a blur of chores, meals I cooked for them, grandchildren I looked after, and hours spent in my little corner, pretending I didn't mind that my name was never used. I wasn't part of their conversation anymore, not in the way I used to be. Instead, I was always just Nana, and that was enough for them. At least, that's what they thought. But I knew. I saw the way they looked at me, the way Lisa would hand me a plate of food without making eye contact, the way Adam would answer my questions with a little too much patience, like I was a child who had forgotten how to behave. The more I lived in their world, the more invisible I became. And in the quiet spaces between their words, in the moments when the house was empty and my feet ached, I began to realize something profound. I had been shrinking, not just physically, though that was happening too, but emotionally. I had become so small, so willing to be overlooked, that I no longer recognized myself. I was a shadow in my own life. It was when I saw that brooch in the pawn shop that the truth hit me like a slap in the face. It wasn't just the jewelry I had lost, it was myself. And somehow, I had let them take it all. My memories, my dignity, my worth. They were all packed away in boxes I never opened, locked away in closets I had no right to unlock anymore. But seeing that brooch, my brooch, worn by a stranger, told me something I hadn't fully understood before. I wasn't just forgotten, I was being erased, and I had allowed it to happen. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake in my small room, the lights of the city filtering through the thin curtains, and I thought about all the years I had spent trying to fit in, trying to be useful, trying to be loved. I thought about my husband, Derek, who had passed away years ago, and how he had always made me feel like I mattered, like my voice counted. I thought about the life we had built together, a life that felt real, but that life had faded long ago, leaving me with this house that wasn't really mine, this family that didn't need me anymore, and the brooch that had become a symbol of my place in their world. Small, insignificant, easily traded away. But I didn't want to be forgotten anymore. I didn't want to be invisible. I had spent so much of my life taking care of others, always putting their needs ahead of my own, always making sure they felt valued and loved. It was time to ask for something in return, not for them, but for me. Time to ask myself what I wanted, what I needed. And the answer was simple. I needed to be seen again, to be more than just a memory in their lives. I needed to remember who I was before I became Nana, before I became invisible. The next morning, I made a decision. It wasn't a grand one, not a heroic one. It was just the beginning of something new. I would go to that pawn shop. I would see for myself what had happened to my things, to my memories. I would face the truth of how much I had lost. And maybe, just maybe, I would find something worth keeping for myself again. It wasn't the brooch that shattered something deep inside me. Not entirely, at least. No. It was the moment I walked into the pawn shop, my heart pounding, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, and the realization that hit me with such brutal clarity. My family, my son, my daughter-in-law, the people I had trusted more than anyone else, had taken something that wasn't theirs. They'd taken me. I had always believed that family was the one thing that could never fail me, that blood, no matter how thin it ran, was the tie that bound. I had always been there for them, whether they needed help with the kids, advice about their careers, or just someone to sit quietly in the background while they went about their busy lives. I gave everything, but I was never supposed to be the one who needed help. Not like this. I remember the day they moved me in like it was yesterday, even though it had been years. Adam and Lisa were so excited, overly so, in that forced way that made my chest tighten with unease. The house was big, spacious. They'd recently moved to a new neighborhood, one of those clean, cookie-cutter developments where everyone's lawn was perfectly trimmed and every house looked like it came out of a magazine. It was beautiful, yes, but I could never shake the feeling that it was too perfect. There was something unnervingly sterile about it, like a place where life couldn't breathe, a place where I couldn't breathe. I had been recovering from a bad fall at the time. My knees and back ached constantly, and I was tired all the time. Adam told me it would be just for a little while, that I should stay with them to get back on my feet. At first I didn't mind. I never minded helping out. It felt good to be needed, to be part of their busy lives, even if I had to sit quietly in a corner while they went about their business. But soon, that just for a little while, turned into something else. Something I couldn't name at first. A subtle, creeping feeling that they didn't really want me there. They were polite, of course. Lisa would ask if I needed anything. Adam would check in now and then. But there was always that edge, that undertone of impatience. And as much as they smiled at me, their eyes always seemed to be looking through me, around me. They would talk over me in the kitchen as if I were a piece of furniture, giving me instructions rather than engaging in any real conversation. Do this, sit here. Go ahead and wait in the other room, Mom. Over time, I began to feel like I was nothing more than a shadow in their lives. A passing figure who didn't quite belong, who didn't quite fit. It wasn't a dramatic shift, nothing I could point to directly. It was all in the little things, the silences, the looks exchanged when they thought I wasn't paying attention. I watched as Lisa rearranged the house to her liking, and I found myself pushed out of spaces that had once felt like mine, even though I had never lived there before. The living room, once a gathering place, became a space for her decorative pillows, her throw blankets, and her neatly stacked books that never seemed to be opened. My chair, the one I had always sat in when we visited, was moved to the back corner of the room, like something you stick in a forgotten closet. My own things, my old trinkets, photographs, books, all sat in boxes in the spare room, as if I were an afterthought. At first I told myself it was nothing. They were just busy, adjusting to the new house, the new routine. But the more I tried to involve myself in their world, the more I found myself shut out. I began to question whether it was just me. Maybe I was being too sensitive. After all, it was their home now, and I was the one who was living there out of necessity, not because I had a right to be there. But then, one day, when I was organizing some old papers in the spare room, I found it. The jewelry box. I had given it to Lisa a year before, asking her to hold on to it for me, just until I felt better. She had said, "Don't worry, Mum. We'll keep it safe for you. It's just a precaution." The jewelry box had always meant something to me. Inside were the rings my mother had worn, the bracelet Derek had given me for our 25th anniversary, and the brooch, the one my mother wore at her wedding, the one I had always loved. It wasn't just jewelry, it was history. It was a piece of me, a piece of my family. I opened the box slowly, my hands shaking, and I was met with nothing but empty space. The velvet lining was untouched, pristine, as if it had never held anything at all. I checked again, convinced that maybe I had simply misplaced it. But no, nothing. The things I had trusted, the things I had given them, were gone. I didn't tell them right away. Instead, I sat quietly in that room, letting the silence weigh on me. The realization settled in slowly, like a cold draft creeping under the door. My family had taken my things. They hadn't just forgotten. They hadn't just misplaced them. They had taken them, with no intention of ever returning them. And that was when the anger began to rise in me, quiet at first, but undeniable. I had given them my jewelry, my family's history, my place in their world, and they had used it, sold it, forgotten it. I confronted Lisa first, as calmly as I could, my voice trembling only slightly as I asked her about the jewelry. She didn't even look at me. Her eyes stayed focused on the laundry, folding towels like it was the most important thing in the world. "Oh, I'm not sure, Mom," she said, with that smooth, practiced smile. "Maybe I put it in a safe place. I'll have to check." It was then that I knew. She wasn't even sorry. She didn't care. I didn't matter. And Adam, when I asked him, his response was colder. "It's just a brooch, Mom. It's not worth anything anymore." Those words hung in the air like a slap. I wasn't worth anything anymore either. I wasn't even worth a conversation. Not really. They had made me small, invisible, like one of those things you pack away, tucked in a drawer or a corner, out of sight, out of mind. But something shifted in me that day. I wasn't going to be a piece of forgotten furniture anymore. I wasn't going to let them treat me like I didn't matter. If they were going to erase me, then I would erase myself from their lives. Not with anger, not with loud declarations, but quietly, decisively, with a choice. I would take my life back, piece by piece, even if I had to start from nothing. The brooch, the jewelry, my things, they were gone. But I wasn't. And I wasn't going to let them take anything else from me. I had always been good at making myself small. I had learned the art of it over the years, long before my son, Adam, and his wife, Lisa, had subtly begun to push me into the margins of their life. I had learned how to disappear into the background, how to fade into the shadows, and pretend it didn't hurt, that I wasn't aware of the growing distance between us. It had started with little things. Comments about my cooking, about my old furniture, about my inability to keep up with the modern world. But it had become something more, something colder. At first, I thought it was just me being sensitive. After all, I was getting older, and there were things I just didn't understand. Things like technology, things like the way Lisa talked about the house, the way she decorated it, the way she arranged it. But over time, it became harder to ignore the way they would handle my things, the way they would talk over me when I tried to offer a suggestion, the way they would make sure their plans were set before asking me if I wanted to join, and most painfully, the way they stopped making room for me in their conversations. I could feel it, like a tide slowly creeping in, taking me further and further from them until I was standing alone on the shore, watching them drift away. They didn't even realize it. Not really. Lisa was busy with her new life, her new friends, her perfect little family. And Adam, my son, the boy I had raised, the one I had cared for, protected, loved, had grown distant. He was there in the house, but he wasn't really there. Not in any way that mattered. He was somewhere else, somewhere beyond my reach, always focused on work, always busy, always somewhere that didn't include me. And the more I saw it, the more I tried to ignore it, the more my sense of self began to erode. It wasn't just the brooch that made everything clear, that broke the dam. No, it was the way they began to treat me, like I was something less, something that could be shuffled aside, put on a shelf, and forgotten about until they needed me again. Like I was a piece of furniture. The chairs I sat in were swapped for newer, more modern ones, the ones that suited their aesthetic. The linens on the bed were changed. The books on the shelves were replaced with ones that I had never seen. And the house that I had once thought of as home slowly became foreign to me. I didn't recognize it anymore, and worse, I didn't recognize myself in it. There were moments when I tried to fight back. I tried to speak up, to remind them of who I was, to remind them of the sacrifices I had made for them, for Adam, for this family. But each time I did, I was met with that same smile, the smile that wasn't really a smile, the one that made my stomach turn. Lisa would say, "Oh, Mum, you're overthinking it? It's just a small change," or, "Don't worry about it, we've got it handled." It was always handled. It was always them, never me, and I was left, time and time again, to sit on the sidelines, to watch them live their perfect lives, and to wonder where I had gone wrong. I started to retreat into myself. The small things I had once held dear, the stories of my childhood, the memories of my marriage to Derek, the moments I had shared with Adam when he was a boy, were slowly locked away in the attic of my mind. I stopped talking about them, stopped sharing them. I felt like a ghost in my own life, like a distant memory that no one cared to remember. My words, my stories, didn't matter anymore. They were old, outdated, irrelevant, just like me. And then, one afternoon, as I was sitting in the living room, reading a book I had borrowed from the library, I overheard a conversation between Adam and Lisa in the kitchen. At first, I didn't think much of it, but as I listened, the words began to sink in, like ice water being poured over my head. Adam was talking about the house, about the bills, about how they were going to handle everything now that I was living with them. But it wasn't the financial talk that caught my attention. It was the way he said it. The way he talked about me. The way he spoke of me as if I were an obligation. "It's just temporary, you know," he said. "Once she's settled, we can go back to normal." And that was it. That was the moment. That was the moment when everything became clear. I was temporary. I was an inconvenience. I was a weight on their perfect little world, and once I had fulfilled my purpose, once I had been settled, they would go back to their normal lives without me. I wasn't part of the plan. I wasn't even a part of the picture. I was just something they had to deal with, something they had to take care of for a little while until they could move on. It hurt, more than I could have imagined. And in that moment, I realized that I wasn't just losing my place in their lives, I was being erased entirely. Everything I had done for them, everything I had given up, was nothing but a transaction, a series of obligations that had no meaning once they had gotten what they needed from me. And once they no longer needed me, they would cast me aside like something disposable. Something to be hidden away in the corner of their lives, to be forgotten about until they needed me again. The worst part was that they didn't even realize what they were doing. They didn't see it. They didn't care. They were too busy with their own lives, their own plans, their own vision of what the future should look like. I was just an old woman, a relic of a past they were trying to outrun, and I was letting them do it. I was letting them take everything from me, and I wasn't doing anything to stop it. But that afternoon, when I overheard their conversation, something in me snapped. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine, that I was fine, when I was nothing more than a shadow of the woman I used to be. I had spent so many years being the one who gave, the one who sacrificed, the one who took care of everyone else. But I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't keep shrinking, couldn't keep fading into the background, couldn't keep allowing them to treat me like I was nothing. I was someone, and I was done being invisible. The first step wasn't big, it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't an act of rebellion or revenge. It was just a small thing, a decision I made quietly in my own mind, a decision to start taking up space again, to stop apologizing for existing, to stop making myself small. I didn't know how I would do it yet, but I knew I had to start. I had to start finding my voice again. So the next morning, I went to the kitchen, and I sat at the table like I always did. And when Adam and Lisa walked in, I didn't look away. I didn't shrink back. I didn't let them ignore me. I spoke. I spoke about my plans, about my life, about the things I wanted to do. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't wait for them to tell me I was being unreasonable. I didn't wait for them to brush me aside. I just spoke. And I didn't care if they listened. I didn't care if they heard me. It was small, but it was a beginning of taking back the space they had tried to erase me from. A beginning of reclaiming my life, even if it was just in the quietest of ways. And that, in itself, was a revolution. It was a Tuesday morning, cool and windless, the kind of grey sky that holds its breath just before the rain. I had gone out under the pretense of needing a walk, needing air, needing to move my legs. But in truth, I needed distance. I needed silence that didn't come with the weight of someone's eyes on me. Silence that wasn't shaped like judgment or dismissal. I walked with no direction in mind, hands tucked in the sleeves of my coat, the one Lisa called too old-fashioned the last time she saw it. I didn't care. The fabric was worn, yes, but soft from years of wear, molded to the shape of me in a way new things never are. It still smelled like cedar from my old wardrobe, and maybe a little like the past. I welcomed it. I turned corners I didn't recognize, wandered blocks I hadn't noticed before, until I came upon a small row of shops, the kind of places tucked between laundromats and discount stores, with faded signs and dusty windows. One of them had a red awning and a handwritten notice taped to the door. We buy estate jewelry, honest prices. Walk-ins, welcome. I almost walked past. I told myself I didn't need to go in, didn't want to stir up anything, but my feet stopped, unasked. My hand reached for the door. Something in me, the part that had grown quiet but not dead, needed to know. Inside it was dim, quiet in that hushed way certain old places are, like time slows down out of respect. A few glass cases lined the walls, filled with rings, lockets, watches, things with lives behind them. Behind the counter stood a woman, maybe in her late 50s, with tired eyes and a gentle manner. She looked up at me, but didn't greet me like a customer. She looked at me like a person. And I hadn't felt that in a long while. I moved slowly toward the back of the shop, where a small table displayed some brooches, none too extravagant, mostly florals and faux gems. And there, set in a small black velvet tray, was the one I knew, like I knew my own face. It was my mother's brooch, oval, gold-edged, with a delicate sapphire stone in the center. I had touched it 1,000 times, worn it to weddings and funerals, and dull winter days when I just needed to feel close to her. Seeing it now, out of place and out of context, was like seeing a photograph of myself on someone else's mantle. I stared for a long time, not trusting my eyes. Then I asked, my voice low and steady, where the piece had come from. The woman behind the counter stepped forward. "Came in last week," she said. "Nice lady, mid-30s. Said it was part of a family lot. We get a lot like that lately. People clearing out old things." She said it without cruelty, without judgment, just a fact. Just the way the world worked now. Old things, old women, old memories, cleared out to make space for whatever was next. I didn't tell her it was mine. I didn't shout or accuse. I didn't cry. I just nodded, thanked her, and walked back out into the cloudy morning. My steps felt heavier, but my spine was straighter than it had been in weeks. The brooch was not the most valuable piece I had owned, but it was the first thing they had taken. And now I had seen it, not in their hands, but out in the open, turned into currency, reduced to decoration for strangers. That was when the haze began to lift. On the walk home, I stopped for a cup of coffee at a small bakery I had never noticed before. It was quiet inside, warm with the smell of yeast and butter. I sat alone, sipping slowly, watching the steam curl up from the cup, and I realized, quite suddenly, that I didn't want to go back. Not just to the house, but to the role I had been squeezed into, the ghost in the laundry room, the silent sitter at their parties, the woman who gave her jewelry away to people who only saw her as a vault they hadn't earned access to. Back at the house, I didn't say a word. I returned before lunch, folded laundry like always, cleaned the counters, sliced carrots into the salad just how Lisa liked. But something in me had changed. I moved with a strange clarity, the kind that comes after you see something you weren't supposed to. That night, I opened my small hidden account online, the one Adam didn't know about. It was an old pension account, a remnant from my days as a school secretary, long untouched, except for the occasional birthday check for the grandkids. There wasn't much, just under $3,000, but it was mine, entirely mine. I stared at the number on the screen for a long while. It felt like more than money. It felt like breath, like space, like proof. I began searching motels in the nearby towns, not booking. Not yet, just gathering. Just allowing myself to imagine. I made a list of what I would need. Not much. Medications, the essentials, a change of clothes, my ID, the deed to the house, which I had hidden in my suitcase months ago after hearing Lisa joke about simplifying the paperwork. She always laughed a little too loudly when something wasn't really a joke. Over the next few days, I moved quietly, but with purpose. I packed a bag slowly, hidden under my bed. I took my time. No drama. No declarations. Just small, deliberate steps toward the door they never realized I was walking toward. I watched the light in the house change throughout the day, noticed things I hadn't noticed in years. The sound of Lisa's heels on the stairs, the way Adam no longer looked up from his phone when I spoke. I memorized those details, not to punish myself, but to understand what I was leaving, and more importantly, what I was walking toward. It wasn't freedom, not yet, but it was movement. For the first time in years, I was walking for myself, and even if I didn't yet know where I was going, I knew I wouldn't turn back. It didn't happen the way I thought it would. I imagined that when the time came, I would be ready, that I would finally break free from the chains that had held me for so long and step into a new life, full of freedom and peace. But, as is so often the case, life took me in an entirely different direction, one that I never saw coming. Several days had passed since I had seen my brooch in the pawn shop, and I began preparing myself to leave this house, this life, these people. I understood now that perhaps no one would be waiting for me with open arms in my new life, but I could no longer stay here. At some point, it became painfully clear. I wasn't wanted here anymore, and I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine, that I lived here, not because I had been abandoned, but because I wanted to. I began packing my things, hiding them in my old suitcase, stuffing papers that had once been mine under my bed. I kept everything out of sight, nothing left on display. Even when I started packing my favorite old purse, the one that didn't match the house, the one that didn't have that expensive gleam Lisa loved, I thought about how difficult it would be. I didn't know where I would go, but I knew I couldn't be part of their life anymore. Then came the letters. I tried not to pay attention to them, hoping they would disappear, just like many other attempts at communication they had sent my way. But they didn't disappear. I couldn't ignore them, no matter how much I tried. Everything came flooding back. The words they had said to me, their warm, almost insincere promises that everything would be normal if I just waited. I was no longer prepared to wait. I couldn't keep being the woman who continued to accept that her children used her to secure their comfort and status, then ignored her like some old item. But what really took me by surprise, and this was so unexpected, I barely had time to prepare myself for it, was that I wasn't ready to face them in the way that was waiting for me. I thought my departure would be quiet, but I had to face reality. A reality I never could have imagined, no matter how much I tried. It was one morning when I was walking down my new road, in my new world, not knowing where I was headed, but feeling certain that I was moving forward, not backward. I was drinking coffee in a small cafe I'd never noticed before. It was quiet inside, warm with the smell of yeast and butter. I sat alone, sipping slowly, watching the steam curl up from the cup, and suddenly my phone buzzed, and I didn't reach for it immediately. I didn't want to look. I knew that it might be something from home, something that would pull me back into that life. I didn't answer at first, but instinctively I felt that it was important. I opened the message, and my heart skipped a beat when I read it. It was from a lawyer representing Adam and Lisa. At first, I couldn't believe my eyes. I knew they wouldn't let me go without a fight, that someone would have to intervene to bring me back. I had expected it, but I hadn't imagined it would come this way. I wasn't ready for legal intervention, for someone using all their resources to pull me back into their life. I thought it was just another attempt to control me, to force me to come back. But something inside me said, "No, it's not like that. You don't have to go back." The lawyer's letter said that they wanted to discuss my well-being and future. They claimed they were deeply worried about me, that I needed to return home, that I couldn't just disappear. I thought, they don't know me, they don't understand. I couldn't go back. I couldn't just walk back into their lives as if nothing had changed. I couldn't be the person who simply lived for their convenience anymore. I decided not to respond. I knew this wasn't the end. I knew they would try again, that they would find ways to reach me. But I was resolute. I wouldn't return to the place where I was not seen, where I was not valued, where my life was nothing more than a convenience to be used and discarded. I had already made my choice. I would not go back. The next few days passed quietly. No more letters, no more messages, just silence. But that silence only made my resolve stronger. The quiet space in this new life gave me a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. It was a small room, not much different from the one I had stayed in when I was younger, but there was something in it, something powerful, that made me feel alive again. I was not being pushed around. I was not being ignored. I was free. I knew I had to stay the course. I couldn't allow them to pull me back into the life that had worn me down. But they didn't stop. They came again. This time, they sent Lisa. She came to me on the day when I had decided to go out for a walk. I couldn't believe it when I saw her there, standing next to her car on the corner of the street, with that expression on her face that I had seen so many times before. The one that said everything was fine, that I didn't need to worry, that they were just concerned. She told me that I needed to come back, that Adam was worried. She brought with her a letter, supposedly from him. But I wasn't ready for that. I didn't want to go back. She tried to convince me that I needed to be with my family, that I needed to be with them, but I had already realized. They were not ready to see me as I was. They weren't ready to be with a woman who had stopped being part of their comfortable picture. And I was not ready to be part of theirs again. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. But I understood that I couldn't go back, not as though nothing had happened. I couldn't walk back into the life where I was nothing more than an afterthought, an obligation. I had to say no. I had to make the choice. Not for them, but for me. I wasn't going back, and that was my moment. The moment when I realized that I had the right to choose. Not them, me. The day I left them wasn't dramatic. It wasn't full of anger or shouting. It wasn't even about making a scene. No, the day I left was quiet. And maybe that's why it felt more powerful than anything I'd done before. The house was still the same. Shiny countertops, freshly vacuumed floors, and that faint, sterile scent of cleaning products that never quite smelled like home to me. It was the kind of place that made you forget you had a past, that you had once been someone else. But it was no longer my home. Not anymore. I was no longer a part of it. I had spent the last few days making plans, quietly, inside my own mind. I didn't tell anyone, didn't explain anything. I didn't owe them an explanation. They had made it clear that I was no longer part of their picture, and I was done fitting into a frame I didn't belong in. When I woke up that morning, something inside me had shifted. Something that had been quietly waiting for the right moment, waiting for me to finally say enough. It wasn't about what they would think, or what they would do. It wasn't even about the idea of being free. It was about me realizing that I was allowed to live my own life, on my own terms, in a way that felt right for me. I had spent so many years living for others, taking care of my son, supporting my family, keeping my life together for everyone else, that I had forgotten to live for myself. I got up early, before anyone else was awake. I didn't want any questions, didn't want to hear any concerns. I didn't want anyone to tell me that I shouldn't go, that I couldn't go. I was past that. I packed a small bag, just the essentials, the clothes I had on my back, my medications, a few personal things that mattered to me. I took the jewelry that had once belonged to my mother, the things that had been taken from me, the things I had given away, the things that had been sold. I packed it all, not because I thought it was worth anything in a monetary sense, but because it was mine, and I was not going to let them erase every part of my life. I wasn't going to let them take that from me, too. When I walked out the door, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The house was not mine anymore, and everything I had left behind didn't belong to me either. The car was still in the driveway, where Adam had left it the night before, as if it were just another piece of furniture, just another thing to be taken for granted. I could have driven away, but I didn't. I knew that wasn't the way I needed to leave. I walked to the bus stop instead. I wanted to leave under my own power, to take the first step in a journey that was mine, a journey that had nothing to do with the people who had tried to strip me of my dignity, my worth, my place in this world. The bus came, and I didn't hesitate. I didn't look back. I didn't need to see their faces again, the faces of the people who had once been my family. I had spent so much time giving to them, being there for them, sacrificing for them, and in return, I had been discarded. I was no longer their mother, their grandmother, the woman they needed. I was just a shadow, something to be tucked away in a corner, something that had become irrelevant. But I had learned something in the quiet of those days leading up to this moment. I was not irrelevant. I was not invisible. I was a person, and I had the right to live, to be seen, to be heard. I rode the bus for what felt like hours, though it wasn't that long. I didn't care where it was going. I just needed to get away, needed to put distance between me and the life I had left behind. When the bus reached a small town, I got off without a second thought. It wasn't much, just a few blocks of shops and cafes and houses, but it was a start. I found a small motel on the edge of town, one that wasn't fancy or new, but it had a room available, and that was all I needed. I paid with the cash I had hidden away, the money that was mine, the money no one else had control over. It felt like a small victory, like I had already taken the first step toward a new life, a life that was mine. The room was small, but clean. There was a bed, a small desk, and a window that looked out onto the street. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I sat down on the edge of the bed and let out a breath I didn't even know I had been holding. I was alone, truly alone, and for the first time in years, I felt a sense of peace. The weight of the years of being overlooked, of being discarded, of being treated like I didn't matter, began to lift from my shoulders. I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't just the person who cooked meals and sat quietly in corners. I was someone, and I was allowed to live my life. As I unpacked my bag, I noticed the small things, the things that mattered to me. The old brooch my mother had given me, the ring Derek had bought me on our anniversary, the letters I had written to my grandchildren, the photos of the family I once had. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew I had started something. I had made a choice to take back my life, a choice to be someone again, someone who mattered. I spent the next few days in that small motel, taking each day as it came. I didn't know what the future would hold, but I didn't need to know. For the first time in years, I felt like I was moving forward, and that, in itself, was a victory. I was no longer defined by my past, by the people who had tried to erase me, by the life that had kept me small. I was moving towards something new, something I couldn't yet see, but knew was there. And it wasn't just about the small victories, the things I had packed in my suitcase. It was about reclaiming my voice, my agency, my life. For so long, I had been silenced, forgotten, ignored. But now, I was taking back the space that was mine. I was no longer willing to be someone else's footnote, someone else's afterthought. I was writing my own story, and it was just beginning. The truth is, the moment I walked out that door, I had already taken the first step. I didn't need to wait for anyone's permission. I didn't need to seek validation from the people who had tried to strip me of my dignity. I was moving forward, and that was enough. I didn't know where this journey would take me, but for the first time in a long time, I was no longer afraid. I was free. In the days that followed, I woke up every morning to the sound of birds outside my small motel window, the quiet hum of the world moving without me. It was strange, at first. This silence that wasn't filled with the noise of family life or the pressures of making myself fit into spaces where I no longer belonged. The room was simple, but it was mine, and every little thing in it was my choice. The bed, the chair I sat in to eat my meals, the books I had brought with me, nothing here was dictated by anyone else. No one told me how to spend my time or what to do with the small bits of money I had tucked away. There was no one to remind me of my age, to tell me that I should slow down, that I was a burden, that I didn't have the right to take up space. There was only the soft rhythm of my own thoughts, the steady beat of my heart telling me that I had done what was necessary, that I had taken control of my own life. I was free, truly free, for the first time in years. At first, I was unsure of what to do with myself. I had no grand plans, no idea of what the future held. I didn't know how long I would stay in this small town or what kind of work I might find, but none of that mattered. What mattered was that I had made it, that I had taken the first step away from the life I had lived for so long. I had spent years being what others expected me to be, the mother, the grandmother, the ever-present, ever-patient figure who took care of everyone else's needs without a word of complaint. But those roles no longer defined me. I was someone else now. I was Martha, a woman who had lived through things, who had survived, and who had finally decided that her life was worth living on her own terms. I didn't reach out to Adam or Lisa. I didn't call, didn't send any messages, didn't try to explain myself. There was nothing left to explain. They had made their decision about me long ago, and it had been my turn to make mine. I was no longer a part of their world, and I was fine with that. It wasn't anger that kept me from reaching out to them. It was something else. Something that had been buried deep inside me for years. It was the recognition that I didn't need their approval anymore, that I didn't need their permission to live. I had spent so much time trying to fit into their idea of who I should be, to please them, to make them happy, that I had forgotten what it was like to make myself happy. I had forgotten what it was like to be me. Now, for the first time in a long time, I was beginning to remember. In the weeks that followed, I started to explore the small town where I had settled. I didn't rush into anything. I didn't force myself to meet people or take on work I wasn't ready for. I just took it one day at a time, allowing myself to breathe, allowing myself to just be. There was a small cafe on the corner of Main Street that I visited every morning. It wasn't fancy, but it had the kind of charm that made me feel like I belonged. The barista, a young woman with a smile that reached her eyes, started remembering my order after the second visit. It wasn't much, but it felt good to be noticed. It felt good to be seen for who I was, not as an obligation, not as someone's mother or grandmother, but as a person, as Martha. I found myself taking long walks through the town, watching the seasons change, feeling the rhythm of life around me. It wasn't the fast-paced, overscheduled life I had left behind, but it was enough. It was peaceful. I didn't need much more. I had my books, my thoughts, the simple pleasures of a life lived quietly and without expectation. There were moments when I missed the noise, the chaos of family life, but those moments grew fewer and fewer. I realized that the quiet, the stillness, was what I had been missing all along. It was in the quiet that I had found myself again. One day, while I was walking by the river that ran through the town, I met an older man, a widower named Tom. He was sitting on a bench, watching the water, and when I walked past, he smiled at me. It wasn't a smile that said anything more than a simple greeting, but it was enough to make me stop. We started talking. At first, it was just small talk, the kind of conversation you have with a stranger when you don't know if you'll ever see them again. But somehow, the conversation turned deeper. We talked about life, about love, about the things we had lost and the things we still had. Tom had lost his wife many years ago, and like me, he had spent years trying to find his way in a world that didn't always make sense. He had his own quiet life now, one that didn't require much from him, but that still gave him a sense of purpose. He was a man who had learned to live for himself, not for others. He had his own little corner of the world, just as I had found mine. It wasn't a romance, not really, but it was a connection, a reminder that there were still people in the world who could see me for who I was, not as an extension of someone else, not as a caretaker or a source of comfort for others, but as a woman who had lived and was still. Living, still learning, still growing. It was a small thing, but it meant more to me than I had realized. It meant that I wasn't invisible. It meant that I had a place in the world, not because I was someone's mother or grandmother, but because I was Martha, and that was enough. In the quiet of that small town, I began to understand that life wasn't about fitting into anyone else's expectations or seeking approval from people who didn't see me for who I truly was. Life was about finding your own rhythm, your own purpose, and learning to live for yourself. I had spent so many years being who others needed me to be that I had forgotten who I was beneath it all. But now, in the stillness of this small town, I was remembering. I was learning to be Martha again, not just a role I had played in someone else's life, but the woman I had always been, the woman who deserved to take up space, to live, and to be happy. And when I thought about it, really thought about it, I realized that I had always been enough. I had always been worthy of love, of respect, and of happiness. It had taken me a long time to see that, to understand it. But I had gotten there. I was still learning, still growing, but I was finally at peace with who I was. I didn't need anyone else's validation. I didn't need to be anyone else. I just needed to be me. And for the first time in a long time, I was okay with that.